Hello everyone, Ariam here, and welcome to a new thing that we're going to try out here on the channel. This is Draw and Discuss. This is going to be a longer video format where I go more in depth into topics that I think everyone might find interesting. The other series, Dinosaur Days, Cenozoic Spotlight, and Extinction Event, are great for giving everyone kind of a way to dip their toes into some topics and get really fast facts that don't go too far in depth, so it's not overwhelming. But some people had mentioned that longer videos are nice to listen to sometimes, and longer videos that go more in depth on topics might be appreciated every once in a while. So, at least once a month, maybe twice if you're lucky, always on a Friday, we will do a Draw and Discuss, where I go more in depth on a topic that I find really interesting, and hopefully you will too. I decided it would be perfect to start with a redraw of my mad sauropod from way back in the beginning of the Dinosaur Days series. Actually, from the beginning, I never liked this piece. I was always dissatisfied with how it came out, and I was kind of ashamed of it, honestly, but I felt like I needed to post it anyway. The center of mass just isn't right, the pose isn't very realistic, and the colors are gross. And not in a zombie dinosaur kind of gross, but just in an incoherent color scheme kind of gross. But I never felt confident enough to try a redraw until now. Sauropods have never been my strong suit, but recently I did a Dinosaur Days episode that is not up yet, of a rearing up sauropod, and I was really pleased with it, so I knew it was time to tackle the mad sauropod again. This topic covers sensitive things like animal death, disease, and gore, so if those things make you uncomfortable, maybe stop the episode here and come back for the next one. The Mad Sauropod is a one-off antagonist from the animated series Primal by Gennady Tartakovsky. The Mad Sauropod episode is haunting, and I highly recommend you try to watch it for yourself in full because I won't be able to fully portray the feeling of disgust and horror that it really brings upon you, but I'll give you a quick summary in case you haven't seen it so you can understand what we're talking about for the rest of the episode. So basically, we start off in this serene, beautiful, prehistoric landscape where a herd of some sort of sauropod, it looks to be an Argentinosaurus or a relative, are grazing peacefully. Then, a lone sauropod is approached by a very sick-looking Parasaurolophus. He's green and drippy and running around in circles, biting at nothing. Something's clearly wrong. The sauropod outweighs this creature by a factor of 100 or more, so it's really not all that concerned. Until the Parasaurolophus bites it in the foot, and then it's concerned. Kicking the Parasaurolophus away immediately kills it, and the poor thing is put out of its misery. The red anger drains from its eyes, as does some sort of swirl, suggesting potentially magic at play. But now our sauropod friend has a nasty bite on its foot, and it turns to the watering hole to go get a drink. Now, this could have been a really clever way to show time progressing, or this infection could have set on immediately. It's not 100% clear in the video. Either way, this guy is not looking very good. He starts turning green and slimy, he has mucus draining from his nose and tears pouring out of his eyes, and as he thirstily gulps down gallons and gallons of water, he starts to throw up even more blood, which is really not what you want. After throwing up what may have been all of his organs in liquid form, his eyes are overtaken by the same swirl of madness as the Parasaurolophus was, and it starts to run around manic and crazed. The sauropod isn't immediately aggressive until another member of its herd tries to stop it from rampaging over its nests and other members. This potentially alpha male sauropod rears up on its hind legs to challenge this nonsense newcomer to a proper duel. And all goes well until the mad sauropod rips out his throat with his herbivorous teeth, not something you usually see. After massacring its whole herd, this now mad sauropod encounters the protagonists of the series, the caveman Spear and his companion T-Rex Fang. This thing is determined to bite them at any cost to its own body. It falls off a cliff, it gets stuck in a canyon, its body begins to rip away, showing really nothing left inside, and it even falls into a volcanic crater, surviving briefly in a literal pit of lava. Whatever happened to the mad sauropod gave it one goal: bite something else. And it also gave it the ability to perform physical feats that a normal sauropod would never be able to do, such as jumping. Eventually, this creature is put to rest by the pit of magma it fell into, but it does pose the question: what exactly turned the sauropod mad? As I mentioned before, there's this sort of swirling effect in the eyes of whatever creature is infected that sort of suggests there could be some sort of magic or curse at play here. There are examples of magic and curses and witches and demons in other episodes of Primal, so that certainly could be what this is. But let's focus on a more biological explanation. In my mind, there are really two possible explanations for what is happening here: rabies or a wasting disease, a prion disease. And for either, this would have to be some sort of superbug or potentially aided by magic, but either one could be a plausible explanation. Let's start with rabies. Rabies is a virus. It's a viral infection that is mainly spread through saliva or contact with blood. This causes encephalitis, which is inflammation in the brain, which has a whole host of other issues associated with it. Early symptoms can include fever, nausea, vomiting, uncontrolled excitement or aggression, inability to move parts of the body or hypermobility, confusion, and loss of consciousness, and this disease is virtually always fatal. Now, a lot of this sounds pretty familiar. After being exposed, the sauropod shows fever symptoms like a runny nose, watery eyes. It's clearly very confused, it has uncontrolled excitement, aggression, and it seems like it's not really in control of its body. So that's all this is, right? It's just dinosaur rabies? Well, there are a couple issues with that. One is that rabies really only impacts mammals. While dinosaurs likely were warm-blooded to some degree, rabies really can't infect birds because of the way that their body is heated differently than mammals. And even some mammals, like the American opossum, really can't get rabies because its body temperature is simply too cold for the virus to thrive in. But okay, let's say that this is a rabies analog that can survive in dinosaurs. There's still one major problem. One of the main symptoms of rabies is hydrophobia, the fear of water. In fact, before the disease was properly named, it was referred to as hydrophobia. And at the beginning of the infection stage, the mad sauropod is gulping down water. It's clearly very thirsty, and an issue with rabies patients is that they're afraid of water and they can't even get themselves to drink because they're so terrified of it. So that's a pretty big flaw in the rabies argument, but it can be explained away with the idea that this is simply a virus similar to rabies that doesn't have the hydrophobia component. And considering rabies at its root literally means madness, that's a pretty strong argument. But let's go ahead and look at one other option: a wasting disease. Wasting diseases are caused by infectious proteins called prions, which is uncommon and very scary. Essentially, what happens is when this prion protein is ingested, it reacts with other proteins in your body and causes them to fold the wrong way. And in proteins, how they fold is how they work, so it really starts to mess everything up. This essentially starts deteriorating everything in your body. You get holes in your brain, your muscles start to lose muscle mass, you are unable to digest food properly, and it is once again pretty much always fatal. Some examples of prion diseases are chronic wasting disease, or CWD, that affects the deer family, mad cow disease, which affects cows, scrapies, which affects sheep, and Crutchfield-Jakob disease, which affects humans. Mainly, the route of transmission is through ingestion. So for deer, maybe a wild deer that had this disease died, and the prions can live for an exceptionally long time on grass or in water, which is how other deer end up infected. Domestic sheep and cattle often ended up with wasting diseases because dead animals were used to make their feed. So essentially, when a cow dropped dead in a field from something that looked like it could potentially pass to humans, instead of getting processed, it was just ground up and used in the feed. So they were eating each other essentially, and this is why you're not allowed to do that anymore. Once we realized how these diseases were spreading, grinding up cows for cow food is not allowed anymore. Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, which is the wasting disease in humans, could potentially be caused by eating contaminated meat or body parts from other mammals that have the proteins in them, although that's a little unconfirmed. Mad cow does seem to be able to transmit to humans, but CWD in deer has not made the jump yet. Fingers crossed that it doesn't. But you can also get CJD in humans by cannibalism. But for the most part, even though you do want to avoid that, you should probably be safe unless you're eating the brain or the spinal fluid, which is really where those prions concentrate. So just don't eat other people and you should be okay. So while the mad sauropod didn't eat the Parasaurolophus, it is possible that some of those proteins were transmitted through the bite, especially with how decrepit and falling apart that Parasaurolophus is. It very well could have just left part of its mouth in the bite wound and transmitted those proteins that way. Wasting diseases do what they sound like they do. They waste you away, and this does happen with the mad sauropod. It loses body mass, you can see its bones. When its ribs are exposed, there's really nothing else in there, and wasting away also includes your brain. You get holes in your brain. And based on the way this creature acts, it's clearly disoriented, aggressive, its movements are erratic. It's very possible that this thing is sort of dissolving from the inside out. However, wasting diseases don't really cause aggression all the time. Sometimes they can, depending on what part of the brain is eaten away first, but it's not a classic symptom. And this sauropod was determined to attack, kill, and mostly bite everything that it encountered. So honestly, the gaps in both diseases, the hydrophobia in rabies and the lack of aggression in wasting diseases, seem to kind of be covered by the other disease. So maybe this is some sort of horrible magical combination of the two. Or maybe this is just prehistoric fantasy horror that really made this animal as scary and disgusting as possible by combining tropes of several real-life diseases, and maybe I'm looking way too much into it. But that's half the fun, isn't it? So, let me know your thoughts. What do you think happened to this sauropod? Do you think it was conscious the whole time? Do you think it was essentially just a husk of a being? Do you think potentially there could have been parasitism at play? Let me know what you think. So that's it for this one. Thankfully, the mad sauropod was put to rest, and you don't have to worry about anything like this as long as you avoid wild animals and don't eat other people's brains. So remember to smile.